Hi, this is Dr. Griffith. I'm going to explain meat production methods to you today for AP Environmental Science. So we are in Unit 5, Land and Water Use, and this is the lecture for 5.7, Meat Production Methods. You'll be taking notes in your packet. We're on page 20. And they're in module 30 in the textbook. So I wanted to start by explaining to you guys the meat poster. I love my meat poster. It's usually up in the hallway. You'd come and see it every day as you were walking into the classroom. What this is meant to do is to show you how much land it takes to feed a meat eater compared to a vegetarian compared to a vegan. So this is a scale model to show you how much land it would take. So this entire amount of the poster here with the beautiful little hot dogs and cows on it would signify 3 1/4 acres for a meat eater. Whereas the amount of land necessary to feed a vegetarian would only be 1/2 acre. And the amount of land it would take to feed a vegan, somebody who doesn't eat eggs or dairy products, that would only be 1/6 of an acre to feed a vegan. So I was just going to zoom in on this a little bit. I know it's kind of hard to see within the rest of the lecture, but I just wanted to show you because it really is such a gorgeous poster. And so here, as you can see, it takes an awful lot more land to feed somebody who doesn't eat meat and who doesn't eat any products from animals. Now, this is not the whole story, okay? There are plenty of places in the world where you can actually have animals made for food, and you can't grow vegetables very well. So there's more to this. And in fact, what I kind of like to do, because I have to say that I do eat meat, okay? So as somebody who enjoys meat, I can tell you that the way I like to look at this is that perhaps since I really enjoy vegan meals and I enjoy vegetarian meals, so as often as possible, I try to eat vegan and vegetarian. But sometimes I'll have food with meat in it. And so what I would like to imagine is that perhaps I'm more of, instead of taking the whole meat amount, I'm more of a tending towards vegan and vegetarianism, and that maybe I would be taking up more like an acre of land instead of like a 1/2 acre, because I'm not a full vegetarian or a full vegan, but I tend towards more plants, which I think is better for the environment, and then I can still enjoy my meat. The other thing to think about is that meat comes from lots of different places. So I'm going to tell you guys about industrial meat production today. It may change your mind about some stuff if you've not heard about these things before, and perhaps a lot of you have already thought a lot about what happens in feedlots and how animals are treated and what that means for you in your life, okay? So the video that's on here, this YouTube video, is the video of The Simpsons, the episode where Lisa chooses to become a vegetarian. So I think that kind of did a lot for people to watch that Simpsons episode. And we can watch that in class together, or you can click on it in the link in the lecture. So the land needed for the production of 1 kilogram of food. For beef, it takes 30 meters squared. For pork and chicken, it takes a little less. For eggs, it still takes a lot of land, but it takes much less land for fruits, potatoes, and vegetables. So similar to the meat poster, it's the same idea, showing you in a little bit different way. So you're writing down 20 times more land on your lecture notes. So the global surface area allocation for food production. So the Earth's surface is mostly ocean, right? So only 29% of it is land. But there's a lot of it that's not habitable land because there's glaciers and barren land. And so there's places where we can habitate, but then a lot of those habitable areas are forests, and forests are very important for the balance of diversity on the earth, as we've learned in the biome units. So there's area that's good for agriculture. And so then how it's allocated from there can make a big difference for how we use our land to grow our food. Okay, so it takes 10 times more water to produce the same amount of calories from beef as it does from eggs and plants. So this is land and water use. These are both limited resources that we have. So it's not just that it takes a lot of land to grow meat, but it also takes a lot of water to grow meat. And so there's a lot of really interesting things on this, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. Okay, so it takes 10 times more water. So we're going to talk about CAFOs. CAFOs are concentrated animal feeding operations. These are where you have high density animal feeding lots for the beef and cattle, dairy cows, hogs, and poultry. We grow a lot of the food that you get when you buy from the grocery store comes from these high density concentrated feeding lots, which are legal but controversial. So they're confined, allowed little room for movement for all or part of their lives, and a lot of antibiotics are used to minimize the rampant disease and malnutrition, because this is not how animals are supposed to live. We have really moved away from how they live in the wild. So by putting them all together very close, they tend to get more sick. So we give them antibiotics, and then we have to worry about antibiotic resistance. So this is one of the negatives of these CAFOs, the concentrated feeding CAFO. I always forget what it is. Concentrated animal feeding operations. It just sounds so not food-like, right? Okay, so the economic benefit of CAFOs is that it minimizes land costs, it improves feeding efficiency, increases the fraction of food that goes in, the fraction of food energy that goes into body mass, so that you can just grow a bigger animal and get more food from it. So we've gotten better and better about being able to produce lots of meat for lots of people. We've invested in this a lot. So these are some of the benefits, okay? But the environmental drawbacks are antibiotic resistant bacteria. And so the way that things become resistant to antibiotics, so this is why you have to take your full course of antibiotics if you are prescribed them by your doctor, because the bacteria grow so quickly. They are the ultimate selected species. What happens is you have many of them. If you don't kill all of the bacteria off with a course of antibiotics, then the ones that make it afterwards will take over and become resistant. And then we can't use this important resource that we have, which is antibiotics that work to help kill off bacteria when we're sick or when animals need it in the wild. And we're kind of forcing everything towards more of a unnatural system. Okay? So antibiotic resistance is one of the major drawbacks. Another one is diseases like mad cow disease. And this came from when we were trying to be super efficient with our feeding operations. And then after cows were killed, you don't want to waste anything. So they were just taking the dead cows and grinding them up and putting them back into the food of the animals that were still alive. And, reduce, reuse, recycle kind of things, right? But it turned out that was a very bad idea, because cows aren't supposed to eat cows. Cows are supposed to be vegetarian. They're supposed to eat grass. They're not supposed to eat meat. They're not supposed to eat corn, actually. So there's some problems that come from that too. They're supposed to eat grass. So when you buy grass-fed beef in the grocery store, that's like what they're supposed to eat. It's kind of crazy that we have to say that. But anyway, when we fed cows, they got mad cow disease. And so there's jokes about it here that people are talking about. But basically what we found out is that by feeding cows, they had a disease in their brain that it was caused by what's called prions. So prions are proteins that are folded kind of incorrectly. I mean, that's a way to talk about it. So it was actually it's pretty interesting from a disease standpoint because it's not caused by a virus or a bacteria. It's caused by what's called a prion, which is a little bit different kind of shaped protein. So these are molecular structures of protein, and that is what ended up leading to these animals being very, very sick. So there's laws that stop feeding cows to cows, luckily. It's really horrible. Okay, so a third drawback is the waste disposal. So the average CAFO produces the amount of manure a town of 5,000 humans would produce. So the normal runoff goes into the waterways and groundways. If we do not regulate this sewage effectively, we have very big environmental problems. So waste disposal is a big problem because there's so much cow poop or chicken poop. So CAFOs, we're growing animals outside of the normal limits of the environment. So there is lots of negative feedback that comes from all of this, or actually positive feedback, but it's negative. It's bad feedback. So this is a picture of a CAFO in Missouri, and it goes through all the different places where they catch or they put the feces from the animals, and where they kill the animals and where they put the remains of the animals, because a lot of the animals aren't food, they're bones and different things. So they try to reuse it, and they try to do this all in a regulated way, but it has a lot of environmental problems to it. Okay. There's also ethical concerns, which many people have very strong opinions about. Personally, I like to eat meat. I don't want to eat meat that had a horrible life. I don't know if that sounds ironic or hypocritical, but I'm fine eating an animal, but I would want it to have lived a reasonable life before it was killed in a humane way. And so really the best thing to do would be to go kill your own meat. I love it when I go up to Alaska and I can have moose that my brother-in-law caught himself. I think that's really awesome. They go out and they get a moose once a year, and they bring it in and they butcher it. And that I feel very good about myself when I eat meat that's harvested that way, or when I catch my own fish and eat those. I feel much better about that. I even feel a lot better about growing my own basil in my backyard. All those things are better and closer to nature, but they're very hard to do every single day because I can't just go kill a cow. I can't go kill a moose. I live in California. So I think about this. I think about it a lot, and I challenge you to think about it a lot too. Okay, so ethical concerns. So there's also the nutritional content of food. So grass versus grain. We can't eat grass, okay? We can't eat grass. We can't digest grass. We don't have the same kind of stomachs that cows do. But we can eat grain. So instead of feeding the grain to the cows, we could eat the grain ourselves. And that's really the big difference. So there's free range grazing. Okay, so these end up, okay, that's the nutritional content. And now we're going to, why is it 2? I'm a little bit off here. Because now we're going to free range grazing. This is on page 21. So the range lands are dry, open grasslands used for the grazing of cattle. It's the most common use for land in the United States. So this takes up a lot more space. So range lands, the grazing is minimal crops and forests. And so this is how it has changed things all over the entire world. A little bit to show you guys where things are. Okay, and where the rangelands are in the United States. Okay, mostly on the west. And so the benefits of grazings is that ungulates or hoofed animals like cows and sheep, they can be raised on land that's too dry to farm. And it uses less fossil fuel energy than feedlots. So if So this is where sometimes it makes sense to eat meat, because this land can't be used for growing crops, but it can be used for grazing cattle. So if there's a small amount of meat in your diet, it actually could possibly feed even more people. All right, so another environmental issue on this one, an adverse environmental issue of free range grazing, is that it's vulnerable to fires because it's arid, because it's very dry. You have stream bank erosion. So when the streams go through, it erodes the soil on the sides. There's pollution of surface waters. So if you have a lot of cows going to the bathroom a lot, it can get into the surface waters and contaminate those waterways. And then you can also have overgrazing. So when you overgraze, it leaves land exposed to wind and erosion. The soils can no longer absorb and retain water. They lose their water holding capacity, and then that'll decrease biodiversity in the long run. Okay, so before grazing, there's a lot of biodiversity, and after grazing, you lose a lot of diversity. So you don't want to overgraze, you need this balance. So we're trying to find ways to work with nature and still have food. So what determines soil quality? So this picture right here is dry, grainy, sandy, poor soil. What you want is rich, full soil. You want humus. So poor soil is no nutrients or the ability to hold water. What you really want is humus. Let me just show you a picture of that real quick. So not hummus, but humus, right? So this is hummus, but this is humus. Humus, and this is a black and white picture here, but this is dark, spongy, absorbent soil that has many nutrients in it, and not just fertilizer, but actual humus. That's what you want in your soil. It's such better. It's so much better. So environmental organizations say that up to 55% of the United States rangeland soils are in poor condition due to overgrazing. So BLM, not Black Lives Matter, but Bureau of Land Management says that their scientists disagree. So there's the Bureau of Land Management is more pro grazing, but environmental organizations are not as much pro. It gets very complicated, so we'll have some more discussions about this. Okay, so there was the Taylor Grazing Act of 1934. Converted federal range lands from a commons into a permit-based grazing system. So the critics said that it cost too little, and so it still continued overgrazing. And then the government spends 7 times more money on management than it receives in grain. So it's effectively subsidized. So we're still struggling with this in our United States history. So the Bureau of Land Management regulations requires to focus on the health of watersheds, habitat restoration, and ecological protections. So they are trying to do the right thing for the environment, but there's no requirement to involve environmental scientists, and the state and regional managers are given a wide latitude for their guidelines and standards. Okay. So why should we reduce meat consumption? I'll give you some environmental reasons why reducing meat consumption makes sense for the environment. One is that it reduces CO2, methane, and nitrogen oxide emissions. So when you have meat, especially cows and feedlots, their burps and their farts give off methane. If you don't regulate their manures correctly, it gives off a lot of methane. It gives off a lot of carbon dioxide because you're having to drive things all over the place. So it creates a lot of greenhouse gases. You can conserve water if you eat less meat because it takes so much water to have the land watered and the animals drinking water. It reduces the amount of antibiotics and growth hormones, both things that can be harmful in the environment, and it improves the topsoil. Of course, there are the ethical concerns about animal treatment, not just that you don't want to kill something because you like the animal. That's one level of ethical concern, but there's also the level of ethical concern where how those animals are treated before they die. So you get to make your own decision. But I want you to make a decision. I want you to think about what you choose to eat. And I want you to have discussions with other people about it in a respectful way. Because right now you may not be choosing your own meals because you may be living at home and somebody else may be cooking for you. But I do want to challenge you, if you would like to eat less meat and you would like to maybe talk to some people in your family about this, I would like you to search out recipes that are delicious and better for the environment. And I would also say that perhaps you should volunteer to go shopping and cook those. And maybe we'll talk about some recipes that are delicious, because I am not willing to give up delicious food. I want a sustainable world and delicious food, and we can have both. Thanks for listening.